Alright gang, for today's video we're going to work on a base mesh for a hand, but instead of a static hand we're going to add in the concept of parenting, which is going to allow us to make a base mesh of opposable hand, which has fingers that bend at the joints correctly and so forth. So you can save off an early copy of this document, and then when you come back in because you want to make a fist, or you want to make like a a ghoulish hand threatening the viewer or something like that, you can always work from the same base mesh. Okay, I've already got my reference image down here, and in this case I've only got one reference image, so it's kind of hard to take your own picture of your hand without the thumb just looking enormous if you're doing a selfie. And besides, I find that the sort of orthogonal image references break down a little bit on the side of the hand because they really cup in, right? So a lot of this needs to be just done artistically anyway. So we're just going to start with a straightforward mesh right here. Got my reference image locked. I'm going to Shift A to add a mesh and extra objects. We love our round cube. That round cube is going to have the following characteristics: a radius of 1, and then maybe we will give it a refinement of say 5 or 6 or something. We'll go with 5 so we're not overdoing it. And I'll grab this and I'll put it into place. Now, unlike some of our previous stuff when we were working with a skull or a figure or whatever, in this case there's really not going to be any symmetry to speak of, right? So that's going to be kind of a new thing for us. So let's rotate this thing a little bit, scale it up, try to get that into place. I'm going to scale it in X and then come in here from the side and scale it very significantly in Y. Kind of squash that thing down, just to kind of get an estimate for what we want this this palm to look like. Okay, so let's see, this needs to be a little more square, so I might get in here into Sculpt Mode, blow up my brush, and take my my grab tool and do this. And I got an error there for a moment because I forgot to accept my transformations, which I do, I feel like, every time. Back to Object Mode, Control A, accept all transforms, back to Sculpt Mode, and then we can come in here and start to squash this thing down. So the hand has at least my hand, your hand might be a little bit different, but it has a pretty square bearing. And then where a lot of the interesting stuff is going to happen is over here towards the thumb. So this little ridge right here is kind of like a web of skin that's kind of skinny. And then we have this big old muscle pad right there. On my hands I've got some calluses and stuff, so this kind of cylinder pops out, and then to a minor degree here as well. But the hand also cups in pretty significantly. So we can take a look at how this form is coming along. I might come in, shrink down my brush a little bit, and then start to push that palm in. Larger brush, kind of cup that guy out a little bit, and then we might sort of mirror that on the back, but I think it's cupped enough already. And right away, once we cup in the center, that's going to start indicating where we're going to head with this thing. But then I'm also going to give myself a pretty significant fat pad right here. So let's just do this with the sort of simple, I always forget the name of this, the draw brush. But we can start to sort of inflate that area. And it's going to be a little hard to tell what's going on because, whoa, that's too much. So hold down Control and kind of shrink that back in. Maybe we just do that a little bit to start, and then we're going to be able to refine that once we remesh this object. Get something going that's kind of like that. So that looks like I'm really overdoing it, but I think the reason is that the thumb is projecting straight out from the flat plane, so that's actually a lot closer than it appears to be at first blush. Okay, so I want to be really good about naming stuff as we go, so we'll call this the palm. And then I'm going to start in here on my middle finger just because it's the biggest one and I've got it right here in the center. So let's add in a cylinder, Shift A. Oops, can't do that because we're in Sculpt Mode, so I'm going to hit A again and then say Clear Mask. Back to Object Mode and Shift A. Mesh and cylinder, and I'm just trying to accomplish one of these knuckles. Let's see, 32 vertices is probably pretty good to work with, so I can start moving this around. Let's grab this. If I say scale and then Shift Z, it's going to let me scale this in both X and Y, but not Z at the same time. And then I can also scale it in Z separately. And for this one, you're actually going to let it penetrate down into the hand a little bit, not quite that much. But we want the this joint to wind up cutting right across here where the finger bends, but then also coming down into here, because if you look at the back of your hand, you'll see that the knuckle kind of pops out down here. So we don't want to just stick this all the way up to the top of that surface. Let's go back to the front. Maybe we're going to scale and Shift Z to kind of get this thing a little narrower, move it over in space a little bit, and something like that's looking pretty good. So if you really want to go for broke, you could also add in some spheres that are in between these cylinders so that when they bend, we don't wind up just opening up a big cut on the finger. But that's just sort of extra work that's not going to have a big payoff in the context of this video, so I leave that out there as an option for you. Okay, now when it comes to the origin of this object, you'll notice, right, if I scale the object or if I rotate the object like this, it's always taking that origin point that's local to this object as the place to start from, the reference point. And so in this particular case, in order for parenting and bending and so forth to work, we need to move that dot down here to the bottom, right, so that when we rotate, we're rotating from the knuckle as opposed to the center of the finger. And the steps to do that are a little strange, right? It took me a while to get used to them. So let's hide the palm, and I have this object clicked on. I'm going to come over into Edit Mode, zoom in a little bit, and then select by faces. I'm going to select this bottom face. Now what I'm going to do is instead of moving that point, I'm actually going to move this object here, which is called the 3D cursor. And there can only be one 3D cursor at a time when it comes to the 3D modeling environment. So to do that, I Shift S, and then I say Cursor to Selected. And that's going to push the 3D cursor, in the case of a circle, right to the center of the circle. Now we pop back out of Edit Mode with Tab. The 3D cursor is still there. The object is highlighted, and then I say Object, Set Origin, and Origin to 3D Cursor. And so I'm going to pause there for anyone who's writing notes. Object, Set Origin, and Origin to 3D Cursor. And now the little dot that was here is in the same spot as the 3D cursor. So the 3D cursor tells new geometry where to land, right? So if I were to add a sphere right now, it would pop in right there. But now what we've also done is taken this local object reference point, or origin rather, and stuck it onto the 3D cursor. So now when I go to rotate this finger, it's going to rotate from there instead of its middle, right? So that's a step in the right direction. Okay, so we might also come in here and put in some extra edge loops, but I'm not going to worry about that just yet. First, I want to get in the rest of the objects here. And I'm also concerned that I'm probably digging a little bit too deep. So maybe we'll take this thing, look in the front view, grab, and kind of move it up, maybe more like to there. And then I'll Shift Z, but you'll see the cool thing here. Oh, not Shift Z, I will scale and then constrain to Z. And you'll see now that also it grows from the knuckle, which is another convenient thing instead of growing from the center. Okay, so you're going to have to play around with this to make it work just right. Maybe I'll rotate this guy a little bit to kind of show that direction. So now when I Shift D or duplicate, right, the cool thing is that I'm going to be keeping that origin point so I don't have to do that again. So this next one I'll stick right there. I will scale and Z. And then now it grows from the knuckle, so that makes it super convenient. And then I Shift D, move this thing up to about there, and then I scale with S, constrain to Z, and I make this one a little bit taller. So at first blush, you would think like these finger joints are all the same size, but they're actually a little different. Also, in this image, I probably have my fingers bent slightly, which will kind of throw things off a little bit, but that at least gets us kind of close. So now if I look into wireframe mode, I can get in here and start to mess around a little bit. So I know my origins are looking good. Now what I might do, for example, is come in through tab, and then I can add in a loop cut. And so I can start to do some loop cuts to round this finger over a little bit. Here I'm going to stick my loop cut much closer to the top. And so now if I switch back to selections, I can select that box. I've got X-ray turned on, so I'm selecting all the way through, and then I can kind of scale things around and try to get them a little bit closer to what's actually happening. You can see that here, for example, at least on my fingers, my knuckles tend to be the widest part, and so they'll always sort of taper in slightly in the middle. So I can head over to Edit Mode with Tab. Add in a loop cut. Come on, little buddy. Do it right there, and then scale it while it's still selected. Head back out, pick this one, tab into Edit Mode, add in a loop cut, scale that down, and so forth. So it's kind of fun to do this with a picture of your own hand, because then as you're trying to work forward with the model, you can just look at your hand as a reference point. And we're just trying to get this thing close. It's not going to be perfect at this particular stage, but that looks pretty good. Okay, and you can see like these are slightly misaligned and everything, but that's actually not going to be that big a deal for these next steps. Okay, object mode. So if I take this object and I rotate it, it's rotating correctly relative to the knuckle. It's at a weird angle, so you'll see that it's important where your view is set up before you make a rotation. If I come in from the side and rotate, it rotates kind of correctly like that. But if I rotate this one right now, the rest of the fingers don't come with it, and we want to address that. So I'll come in here, and I'll zoom out a little bit. I want to show the palm, as that'll be important in a second. And then I'm going to start with the outermost extremity. So I'll start with my fingertip, and I'm going to hit, let's see, fingertip, and then I'll shift select the next segment in. On the Mac at least, I'll hit Command P, and then it says set parent to, and in this case I'll say object. So that's going to give these two a relationship. So now I should be able to rotate this knuckle, and the one above it comes along. But then if I rotate this one, it can do that independently of everybody else. So that's looking good. Okay, now I just go down the line, right? So I take the middle joint and then shift select the next joint in, Command P, go ahead and parent to object. And in each case, you can test them if you want to, just to make sure they're working correctly, and they are. And then finally, I'm going to parent this position relative to the palm. So I look to you, and then I say shift P, or I'm sorry, Command P, blah, I gotta go 1, shift select, Command P, and then parent to the object. So this is a pretty cool thing here right now, because I can take the palm and I can grab it, I can move it around, and the fingers come along, and then I can pose them. Now to make this even cooler, we can get in here, we can grab these little objects, and now I'm going to come in and say shift, wait, let me make sure I get this right. In this case, it's going to be Alt-D. So that's going to allow me, on the Mac keyboard, it'll be Option. So Alt-D, and I'm going to be able to copy this finger. Now watch this. So I'll take the finger, I will rotate it a little bit so it's got a better orientation. I'm going to scale it a little bit, and then I'm going to grab it and kind of move it into place. So that's going to be my ring finger. But then if you watch this, if I did this right, if I take this guy and rotate it, you can see the parenting stays around. So we only had to do that parenting one time. And then I will take this, all 3, Alt-D, move this down to the pinky area, rotate it into place, grab it and move it down. This one might need to get scaled ever so slightly. And then finally I'll come back and start from my middle finger again, and then I will Alt-D, move into place, and again scale very, very slightly. Cool, so what we're going to have right now with relatively little work is some fingers that are all parented to this main palm. So if I grab the palm, I can move it around. If I take one of these fingers, I can pose it by rotating the different pieces out. And then I get something like that. And then if it turns out that I don't like the things that I've done, I'm going to have to look this up, but there's a way to just basically zero out all those rotations and pop everything back into place. But for right now, I'm just going to do that through undo. If I look this up and find it, I'll post it online. Let me just pause the video for a second, see if I can find it. Okay, I took a look at my notes real quick, and it is Alt-R. So what I should be able to do now is pose these fingers. I know this angle is weird. And then if I hit Alt-R, I can get whatever is highlighted to pop back into place. Awesome. And it looks like, whoops, doing that messed up my other rotation too. So let's do this, pull it back into place. Cool. Okay, so for the thumb, if you take a look at your hand and just hold it up, right, you'll see that there's actually a fairly significant kind of chunk or piece of meat flying up off here into space. So let's go ahead and make this finger the same way we made the other ones. Regrettably, we're not really going to be able to use the same material because the thumb is so different. And I might also take this opportunity to remesh this object. So let's get in here with Shift R. Oops. I'm going to have to do that from Sculpt Mode. I make these mistakes to show you that everyone makes mistakes. So Shift R, let's maybe take this down to like 0.1 or something. And then I'll Control R, and that kind of gets us, not too many polys, but gets us a little bit closer. And then maybe I can come in here and kind of fatten that up, but also smooth it out a little bit with Shift. So at this point, if you want, you can do a little bit more work on the base mesh, but I think it is largely there. So I would go ahead and save off a copy of this file. And then if we get in here to do a pose, let's say that we take all of these lower finger segments, rotate and kick them all forward a little bit. And then I'm going to pose each of the fingers individually so we just get some relaxation in there. Always making sure to come in from the side so I don't wind up with a wonky rotation. And this is going to be much more believable than what we were working on to this point. This one's going to rotate much more. And we're looking to make sort of, interesting profiles when it comes to looking at our hands. Rotate that one and rotate that one. I might come in here, and sometimes you really got to find the angle, right? So the thumb isn't going to be orthogonal to the world's coordinate system. So you're going to have to move the frame around until you find it what that's supposed to look like. Something like that. That thumb is looking pretty funky still. Maybe I'll rotate that in slightly. But now we're starting to get kind of a more natural hand. Maybe I'll come in here and rotate this even further out. So your hand is almost never, stiff like a pancake like that. So let's say that you do this and it's starting to get pretty close. I can also right-click this and say Shade Smooth to kind of get an idea about how these segments are going to look. I've already saved off a posed version, or rather a non-posed version of this particular hand. I didn't do it with you guys, so maybe I'll just do it real quick myself. Although if I were you, I would do it before it gets posed as I did it. So I'll just save this, let's say, to Untitled to the desktop right now. Oh, bad habits all over the place. Okay, now we need to get in here once we have our base mesh down, and we actually have to start working on making this a realistic looking hand. Okay, so while these fingers are still connected, because we copied them with Alt-D instead of Shift-D, we still have some opportunities to make changes to them that will actually cascade across all of the fingers. So if I come in here, for example, on one of the finger segments, I don't believe I have to work from the first finger that I sculpted, but I can do that just in case. Let's go down to Sculpt Mode. These are not going to have very many polygons right now, so I'll come in here and Shift-R it. Yeah, let's go down to 0.1. And then, Shift 0.1, Control-R, and you see how when I updated that one, all the rest of them jumped into place. And so now I'm going to have an opportunity to come in here and to start to clean up these fingertips. So let's grow our brush. Let's start to sort of pull those in so they have a nicer taper. I'll come in here with smoothing and then really go pretty hard. You'll see that this process is also flattening those fingers, so I'm changing the scale a little bit. I shouldn't say flattening, I mean like shortening. So as you mess around with this, you might need to do that, and then come back up and scale them again. Pull them back out, maybe in object mode. What you can also do is you can come in and start to make some fingernails. So I'll have Draw Sharp with a small brush, and this is with the subtraction selected, and I can start to lay out some fingernails, which will update throughout. It looks like I probably don't have quite enough polys in here to make the fingernails as sharp as I want, but that just kind of gives you a sense of how you can lay things out that'll perpetuate across all of the fingers. Okay, so once you like where that stuff is looking, we're going to go ahead and join all of this together and remesh it. I better round off the thumb a little bit while I'm thinking about it. The thumb, of course, is sitting out here by itself, so when we mess around with this in the sculpt mode, it's not going to affect anyone else. Whoa, that's the effect that I got through through smooth before I remesh this guy. So Control R, remesh, and then I can kind of come in here and start to make that look more realistic. Although thumbs do stay a little pointy. At least mine does on the front there. And then if you want, you can come back into object mode and say scale that in Z, and try to reclaim some of that lost material when we were working with smoothing. Anyway, do as I say, not as I do. You guys are going to do a great job. I'm just trying to give you a sense of where all the tools are located. So once all that's done, we're going to come in here and we are going to join this thing together. So I select all with A, and then I Control J for join, and now you can see that I just have this one object here in my layers called cylinder 013, and that's all of these things put together. They still are a little bit separated in certain contexts. So if I go to edit mode, for example, or maybe it was, this showed up a little different for me last time. Sometimes you'll see all of the different objects relayed in different colors, so I'll have to figure out what the difference was there. But in addition to joining them, we now want to go ahead and remesh them all at the same time. And the big thing that I'm going to be looking for is I want to be careful that I don't wind up remeshing in such a way that I start getting polygons leaping across very small gaps that I've created. So if I just go to Control R with the, got to be in Sculpt Mode. That's what I was looking for. So there are my separated colors. Object has non-uniform scale. Let's take care of that with Control A, all transforms. Okay. And then back over to Sculpt Mode. So this can still be useful if you're trying to change, one object relative to another, but we're just going to go ahead and skip right by that, and I'm going to hit Control R. And you can see based on my initial polygon size, that is way too big, and so it's caused all of those gaps just to hop together, and I've got kind of like, like a fish fin here or something like that. So we're going to have to go smaller. Let's hit undo, and I'll go back to Shift R. And in this case, maybe we'll move it down to, I don't know, something in the 0.02 territory. Control R. And that's better. You'll see there's still some little issues in there, so you're going to have to mess around with that until you can resolve it. Either that or before the join step, you might want to go back and undo and pull these fingers a little further apart so they're not creating that issue. So I'll Shift R again. Let's move maybe down to 0.015. Don't want to go too small now because it's just hard on the computer. And that gets us pretty close. That's the kind of thing that I can come in and mess around with as we move forward. So now we're a lot closer to where we want to be with the hand, although there's still a bunch of issues to take care of. Primary among these is these giant gaps that are cut in here from the knuckles. So fortunately, Smooth actually does a really good job at addressing these. So I'll just pick up pretty much any brush over here and hold Shift. And then if I hit Smooth, you can see it's just going to try to make that bridge happen and pull it out. Now in the process, it's going to give me a pretty good dent. So I'll be switching back and forth between Smooth and clay strips. So here I can lay in my clay strips to make sure that my knuckle doesn't sink into space. And then I can, while I'm on clay strips, hold down Shift to smooth things out. And then over time, with different brush sizes and so forth, it'll be like those things were never there. Like so. So you've already done some practicing if you've watched my previous tutorial with sculpting. So at this point, it's really just, sitting here. But one of the reasons I'm sculpting a left hand is because I'm right-handed, so I can just look at my left hand right here in my workspace and work on it that way. There's going to be a lot of work to do here, right? So bridging some of that. Let's go a little bit smaller on that. You might think, oh, the knuckle's right there, but the knuckle is actually a lot further down on the hand. It's kind of buried more right here. So you want to kind of establish these knuckles. You also want to take a look at the bones that are proceeding down from the knuckles. So that's too fat, but you kind of get the idea of where that's going to be heading. This hand probably bulges out a little bit back here. So I'm going to take a really big brush and kind of pull that all in so I flatten it out. But also if you hold your hand up to your own eye, you'll see that this whole area actually proceeds really far out. So it could be that before I join this base mesh, I'd probably want to be more aggressive with the kind of triangle here that causes your hand to stick out. And then we'll just be going through and, bridging the palm and the back of the hand. Whoops, I think I'm still on grab with clay strips, so that we lose those breaks or those like obvious changes between two pieces of geometry that we had before. So you get in there, you mess around with the nails. You'll get into the palm, which has now been remeshed, so we might want to come in and smooth that out so we get a better sense of where our details are. We can come in with draw sharp, which you want to use sparingly, but sort of give yourself a sense of where those lines are on the hand, and then get all this stuff unified. And then you'll have a nice posed hand, and when you're ready to make a hand in a different position, you just go back to that original base model, load it up, pose the fingers, and then you'll be light years ahead of the sculpt if you compared to if you were just starting from like a sphere from scratch.